Welcome back, all you fellow gardeners. I hope you've had fun this beautiful September doing all your gardening now that the weather's cooled off and we've had a little bit of rain. I'm taping this early. We won't post it until the 1st of October, but so much is happening this month that I wanted to share with you and I think would be helpful for you as you're planning your future gardens. Having a successful garden is in my opinion, not so much about trying to know everything and all the terminology as it is about the ability to observe, daily garden walks to see which plants are thriving, if there's any insect infestation or any disease issues you need to deal with, because if you catch those things early, they're very manageable. Diligence, weeding. Some things do not do well with weed competition. So keeping those weeds under control. And then timing. In Missouri, we can say, well, in September sometime you should do this, or in October, maybe November. And it depends so much on the weather conditions because we can have huge extremes. When I did the last taping, it was like, oh goodness, 90 some plus degrees, and it felt like 90 plus humidity, and everything was wilted, including us. And then over that weekend, a cool front came in and the temperatures dropped, and I actually recorded another little video of the same garden space just 1 week later. It was, I believe, September 8th, and we're attaching that one just so you can see the dramatic difference 1 week can make here in the Midwest. So again, when I talk about some of these things, keep that in mind as well. And then record keeping, and that is, I'm terrible at it. I garden by feel and observation. So if I know that rain is coming in and the soil is at the right texture and consistency, I'll plant and let the rain take care of it. Other people are much more regimented in what they do, and a lot of that depends on your own gardening style. Nobody can know everything. No one can. In fact, my personal opinion is those who think they know it are those who have watched too many YouTube videos while sitting on their couch, because nobody's going to show you their failures. They're going to show you the things that have worked, the things that are beautiful. They're not going to show you their weedy gardens in the middle of August. So keep that in mind and use failures as learning experiences, because that's the fun of gardening. Everything everything changes from year to year, and you're learning all the time. Nobody can learn it all. And then, as I said last time, gardening is very regional, and it's even site specific. And some of it has to do with your own personal style and eating habits. And one example I intended to share last time, and I don't think I did, was about green peppers. My parents were gardeners, and I watched them growing up, and they never ever staked peppers. And when I would read about people, recommendations for peppers, they always talked about staking them or caging them, and I just couldn't figure that out because I never saw the need. Well, then I realized my parents always harvested them while they're green in an immature stage, so they never had plants loaded with peppers waiting for them to turn red or yellow or whichever. So their plants were always small, their fruit was always small, so the stalk could support the peppers. But if you're growing them for those sweet red peppers that we're harvesting now in September, or for yellow peppers, then definitely you're going to need to stake or cage them. So see, sometimes it's just a matter of growing habits and eating habits and the things you enjoy. There's not a right or wrong, it's just different. And it's so important to grow what you like and what you'll eat. And really make use of. And this might be the time to take notes from this year. Perhaps you grew way too much of one thing and not enough of another, or there's something you want to try that's new. Honestly, we grew okra and pulled it out and never ate any of it. And I just confess, I planted it because the seeds were getting old and I knew no insects would bother it. and we might want it in August. Well, okra is itchy, and I just when it was ready, it was hot, and I had too many other things to harvest and take care of, and just never did do it. So as we were cleaning out some of our plants, we cleaned it out, and I don't feel guilty at all. I like to grow things that are easy to store. I've mentioned this before, but I'll probably mention it every single time. Things like sweet potatoes will store from season to season, and that's something that is ready to be harvested in September or early October. The weather conditions here have been such that they're sizing up early and they can be harvested any time, but they should be harvested before frost. And frost in this area comes mid second to third week in October. So if you have not harvested them before then, be sure and get them out. And then things like spaghetti squash, I showed you that last time, and blueberries. And then some of my other favorite things I grow as perennials that I want to share with you today are onions, garlic, and shallots. And they will need to be planted late October, possibly the first week in November. I usually do them the last week of October if the weather is permissible. If not, it'll be the following week. And these are some things that you may never have thought about growing on your own, but they're very, very simple. And they're just a different rhythm because typically we plant in the spring and then harvest in summer or fall. Well, these are planted in the fall and then they're harvested like the end of June or the 1st of July. So let me show you what I'm talking about. This is the typical onion that you would plant, and this is one I harvested. It's like a Texas super sweet. Was planted probably late March, harvested early July, if I remember correctly, and they cured, and they're great. And this is what I use in my salsas, but they don't store well. So by early fall, later fall, these seem to be all right, but some of them I've cut open have started to turn in the core, and they will definitely not store all winter. So the ones I use for winter storage are a perennial onion. This is called a potato onion or a multiplier onion. And they're planted in the fall, like late October, early November. And when they grow, they're like bulbs. So I'm breaking it apart to show you. And the size varies depending on the soil. And you'll have 2 or 3 large onion bulbs here. They are a stronger onion, but rather than purchasing onions in the winter, when usually I'm using them in stews or soups or something, or for flavoring or in green beans or whatever, these are great for that. And I purchased them several years ago and haven't since then. So what I do is these are some I grew from last year. So I will plant these the end of October, and then they will overwinter. I'll mulch them. In fact, I'll go ahead and tell you how they're planted. You cover them with about 1 to 2 inches of soil. So some of your soil that's prepped for fall, you go ahead and plant them, cover them with 1 or 2 inches, and then I mulch them with straw heavily. And then in the spring, when things are starting to green up, I pull the straw away, and then it serves as mulch in the rows because none of these things like weed competition. So to make that simpler, I put the mulch directly over them after I plant them, and then I pull it to the side in the spring, and then they'll grow, and then I harvest them, and then there's a curing process. But it's a great way for perennials. You never have to rebuy your plants or your seeds. You just continue to reuse from the same ones. So that is a potato onion that you may not have heard of. I hadn't until I started growing them. And now I'm going to show you some of the others, like shallots. This is a piece of one. There were 2 together. This isn't the other half. I don't know what happened to the other half of it. But they grow like those same potato onions, and you plant them like covered with 2 inches of soil. And then they're harvested at the same time. And they're just a mild, wonderful taste. I really enjoy them. They're expensive to buy. And you can grow your own and keep them from year to year, grown similarly to the potato onions. And then the next thing I want to show you is garlic. If you're purchasing garlic from the grocery store, um, this is probably the kind you'll get. It's called a California garlic, soft neck garlic. Actually, a lot of it's imported from China or was. Um, but it has the big cloves, and I grew this one actually. And I don't know, there must be 20, probably 20 cloves in it. This is the kind that if you're braiding it, the green tops that grow out are quite flexible, and you can make garlic braids if you choose to. And then when you get ready to replant it, you take one and then you break it apart just before you plant it. So I'm going to break this into all these little individual cloves, and then I'll plant this covered with 1 to 2 inches of soil with the root side down. And you can tell very easily which side goes up and down. And then it will reproduce and it'll turn into something like this by the next spring. And you'll plant them 6 to 8 inches apart so they have plenty of space to grow. So see, I'm breaking it apart into cloves, individual cloves. And you don't peel those cloves. You leave the skin on them. And you plant them down and covered with 1 to 2 inches of soil. Then you'll have your own garlic year after year. And it stores well. I use it all the way through. I haven't purchased garlic for several years. Now, the other kind of garlic that you can grow is hard neck. This was a soft neck garlic. That's the kind that you can braid. This is a hard neck. This is actually Osage garlic. It's supposedly came from one of the Indian settlements here in mid-Missouri, and I've been growing it since then and from year to year. It's similar in look. This is a little bit stronger flavor, but it's very adapted to Missouri soils. The difference is, and I don't know if you can see there, it has this hard stalk that comes up the middle. And this kind produces garlic scapes, Scapes. You'll see those sometimes at markets. And it's this green, kind of a little curly Q that comes up in the midst of the garlic stalk. And you pull those off. You don't want to leave them on because they'll keep the plant from developing fully. And they'll eventually become a seed head. So you pull them off, and then you can use them like a green onion, or they can be pickled, or I have a pesto that I make with them. You can Google ideas for ways to use garlic scapes. And they come up, it's usually early June, probably the first week of June, you'll find those growing out of your garlic. And people will ask, so if my shallots go to seed or my garlic goes to seed, can I just plant the seeds? And you can, but it takes about 2 years to get anything large enough to be edible. So it's an easier management system if you just take the one you grew the year before, break it apart in the fall and plant it, and then harvest the next year. Okay, so there are my garlic, onion, and shallots. And that will need to be done again the late October. Last week of October is usually a great time here in Missouri. Another thing, and I mentioned digging sweet potatoes, with the garlic and the shallots and the onions is, again, they don't like weeds. So be sure you have a way to mulch them. I told you when to remove the mulch. And that should be, and then curing, we'll talk about curing next year when we're doing, and hopefully we'll be gathering together again, but we'll talk about curing next year after we harvest them. Right now, the important thing is the planting. Now, I mentioned to you last time this great new book I have, this gardening bug book that was recommended to me from an entomologist at K-State. And it has everything in it. And I just thought it might be fun to take one of our most dreaded pests and take a careful look at it. And if you don't recognize these, good for you. Because if you grow squash or pumpkins or anything like that, they are invasive and horrible. They're squash bugs. And the reason I think it's important at the end of the season to talk about some of these is because, like with squash bugs, they overwinter in debris. So it's important to get all those things off your garden. So like my pumpkins, they just were covered with squash bugs. Well, I grew them. I showed you my pumpkins last week, and I grow them mainly for seeds. I don't grow them for seeds for roasting. I don't grow them for jack-o'-lanterns necessarily. So they were a little earlier and they were done. So I went ahead and pulled all the pumpkins off. Well, the squash bugs were just everywhere on the vines, and I was debating. I was like, just let them have them. But then I read in this that those squash bugs that are adults find a place to overwinter, and here they come back again in June. So it is important that when you're done with your plants that you pull them away. I mean, if you have a way to burn them, or if you have you wouldn't want to compost these, but we have we're on land and farms, so we have a place. We always say we have our compost pile, then we have our over the fence, and over the fence is in the woods. And that's where things go, that it's far away from garden, far away from house, and things that we just don't know what to do with. So that's usually where our vines would go. But to be sure and remove them from your garden space. The squash bugs, and there are differences. Even in this book, it says that they mostly like hard melons, like no, excuse me, winter squash, including pumpkins. So like butternut squash, those kinds of things, those winter squash and pumpkins. But my experience has been that they're most invasive on zucchini and summer squash. This says rarely summer squash and melon are damaged, but that has not been my experience at all. Usually the zucchini, it's like you'll be gone for a weekend and you come back and the plant is totally wilted. That's because they reproduce so quickly. You find those little bitty tiny um, eggs on the underneath side of the leaves, and then when they hatch, they are just thousands of them, and they're very hard to kill in the adult stage. And you know what I've decided I'm going to do this year is after I pick all the fruit off, so I get all the pumpkins off, or I get all the squash off, I'm going to heavily spray my plant to try to kill those bugs, because I don't want them overwintering anywhere. Now, some of the other invasive things, we think about it. We think we want to grow as organically as we can, and maybe reflect back to a time where there weren't so many sprays used, and we're like, so why are we spraying everything, or why are all these insects showing up? A lot of them have been imported. They were not an issue. Stink bugs are a new thing that have been imported, and they're pervasive now. Japanese beetles are another new thing, and there are numerous ones like that our grandparents didn't have to deal with, even our parents when they were gardening. So it's a matter of learning the life cycles of these invasive insects, and then doing our best to eradicate them. Japanese beetles will move in. Usually it's early July, and they will eat everything in sight. So if you find them, and they're easy to identify, and we'll probably talk about them next year, but if you find them, don't use a trap, because that will attract more. The best thing to do is spray them. And we've done it different ways. One time they came in on our peach tree. There weren't very many. There were probably a dozen. So we just went ahead and picked all the peaches off and then sprayed the tree. This year we found them on leaves of a couple other fruit trees. Those trees the frost had killed the blossoms and there was no fruit on them. So we sprayed those trees heavily. Again, because there was no fruit, it didn't matter. There's nothing we were going to eat. And we did not want the Japanese beetles reproducing. And that was the key, because they fly in from wherever they are nearby, but you don't want them reproducing. And they like rotten fruit. So if you have tomatoes that you're done with and you just let them rot, keep a careful eye out, because Japanese beetles like those, and like rotten peaches, any rotting fruit they're attracted to as well. So sometimes it's just a matter of learning the habits of those insects and doing the best you can to reduce or eliminate them that way. so that we aren't spraying unnecessarily or adding the harsh chemicals. Because our goal with gardening, most of us, is because we want healthy food. Okay, so don't forget to take a look at the attached video because that is another example of, again, our Missouri weather and the change from one week to the next. And enjoy your beautiful fall garden and this fall, and we will talk again soon. Last week I showed you this garden and it was like 90 degrees, 95, and it felt like 90% humidity. And this is the fall garden. So I said, if you can keep it alive through that, keep enough water to it that it will be so happy when the weather cools down. Well, today, 1 week later, it's a high in the upper 50s. And these plants are so happy. I've just picked the first of the green beans from the fall beans, and I've also picked turnips. These are a salad turnip. They're very sweet. In fact, we like them raw, just like eating an apple. They're wonderful, and they can be roasted as well, but that's a treat in the fall. And the kale is super happy, and will bear until kale is happy until the temperatures get down into the 20s. So here, it's worth it if you are interested in extending your season to use row covers, drip irrigation, and just pamper those plants a little bit, and they'll serve you throughout the fall here in Missouri.